Good evening. I'm Vic Marks, and I am pleased to welcome you here tonight for the 8th week of 10 questions, if not now, when? Tonight, as we consider the question, how do we build? My first thoughts are that building conjures new, shiny, more, bigger. And my first thoughts continue that building requires visionary leadership. And maybe all that's true. However, how do we build is a question about collectivity, and it invites us to attend to this moment, having arrived from that which came before, with the opportunity to make choices, render decisions, lay out stakes in ways that will shape our future. I want to acknowledge important global and national events that address this question directly. At the recent United Nations Climate Change Conference in Scotland, delegates from nearly 200 countries came together to build a coalition committed to scaling down global greenhouse gas emissions. How did it go? Well, reports are disappointing. The 1.2 trillion infrastructure plan, known as Build Back Better, that was just passed in Congress and signed by President Biden today, promises to provide money for childcare, healthcare, and industry that will slow climate change. The title, Build Back Better, expresses nostalgia for a supposed past with a promise for future improvement. Large governmental projects like rebuilding US infrastructure and building a global alliance to address climate change require compromise and collaboration, as well as a reconciling of our past actions with our aspirations for the future. Dear students, I imagine that you want to build your independence in this transitional moment between the shelter of family and your own incipient adulthood. You're probably concerned about who you will continue to become and what you will do. And I'm guessing that you are thinking about your career path, a degree, a job, more school, care for family. You're thinking about building a life, is my guess. And at the same time as you are instructed to be pragmatic, you might also be asking, what comprises a life worth living? The poet Mary Oliver famously wrote, "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" Whatever your circumstances, how do you build a life worth living? And how do you find work that matters? I don't have all the answers. I live these questions too, as I'm sure everyone gathered here with us tonight does. By the way, though we cannot all see one another, we are here together. Please consider using the chat to make yourself present within our larger collective presence. I encourage you to do so throughout the evening. Affirmations are welcome, as are comments and questions. So if you're inclined, right now in the chat, fingers ready, I invite you to share what you are building towards, either individually or collectively. What are you laying the groundwork for? I'll continue, but I welcome your responses. Building can be a return to core principles or can require a reformulation of core principles. it can be a way to reimagine the future. Tonight, we'll think about realizing the dream of building towards urban sustainability through the power of bringing people together from diverse areas of expertise. We'll consider reimagining and repurposing soon to be obsolete aspects of our landscape so that they contribute to the betterment of future lives. We will encounter culture that communally builds while also crediting individual contributions, that reinvents itself, charts new courses while honoring the past. Building invites us to be present in our communities and to listen well. This evening, we're delighted to bring together Dr. Eric Hoek, professor in UCLA's Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering, architect and UCLA professor Jeffrey Inaba, and Adam Bradley, UCLA English professor and director of the Laboratory for Race and Popular Culture. Each will share a brief presentation of their work as it relates to the question of how do we build? We'll have a brief interlude as we view the work of 7th and 8th grade students from the Social and Gender Equity, known as SAGE, magnet at Millikan Middle School. And we'll follow with a discussion and a Q&A with our panelists. Here we go. It gives me pleasure to introduce Dr. Eric Hoek, who is a professor in UCLA's Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering, Institute of the Environment and Sustainability, and the California Nanosystems Institute. He's also faculty director of the UCLA Sustainable LA Grand Challenge, a campus-wide initiative to transform Los Angeles into the first sustainable megacity by 2050. Dr. Hoek's academic work explores the union of membrane technologies, nanomaterials, and electrochemistry for a more sustainable future. He's also applied this knowledge as an entrepreneur, having co-invented and founded several technology companies and having worked widely on applications including drinking water treatment, desalination, and reuse. Welcome, Dr. Hoek.
Thank you, Vic. Thank you all for being here, and my fellow panelists as well. I think we have a brief video to put on to talk about the UCLA Sustainable LA Grand Challenge, and then we can play that, and then I'll add a few remarks at the end, if that's okay.
That's why we're pursuing other grand challenges, like making solar energy as cheap as coal, or making electric vehicles as affordable as the ones that run on gas. They're ambitious goals, but they're achievable. And we're encouraging companies and research universities and other organizations to get involved and help us make progress.
I think people have a sense that we are having a huge impact on the environment. There's probably a sense that these changes are irreversible, and I think people are afraid. You know, one reaction to that fear is to shut down and not think about it. And another reaction, in some cases, to deny that these changes are happening. I think fear creates all kinds of reactions. So this is about addressing that and making people recognize that the future can be bright.
I'm a curious engineer, and I think I'm always looking to solve the real hard problems. And what we're doing is taking some appliances like refrigerators, dryers, air conditioners, and we're adding electronics to these existing appliances, and we're putting them in UCLA dorms. We have the mindset, we have the people, we have the campus. Let's harness the sun's energy directly into the grid. We'll be burning less fossil fuels. Let's store that energy in electric vehicles at night when we don't need to use that energy. Now you drive your car into work in the daytime and you can power your grid from your car. I already have an EV that you can charge at night and discharge into the grid in the daytime. I think that for someone like me, an engineer, we need to make a difference. I want to make a difference.
I chose engineering not because it was easy, but because it was hard. You know, I'm probably not the smartest guy. I'm not the best guy at math, and I knew that at a very young age. But I thought these other things were relatively easy. Engineering was the thing that was hardest for me to try to do well. I thought, well, then that's the thing I should try to do. I have a strong engineering sense that I can break down complex problems. I can identify where the real hinge points are in a problem, where if you can understand it and then you can change it, that now the game really changes. It's really the art of turning a problem into a solution.
As a kid in rural San Diego County, I could see the chaparral and hear coyotes at night, and it was just beautiful. Then one day I woke up and there was the sound of a bulldozer. And I went out and looked, and there was a bulldozer operator scraping the bottom of the canyon, scraping all of the vegetation. It was an absolutely searing experience to watch them rip this place apart. I went down into that canyon and begged that bulldozer operator to stop. I do what I do because I think that we've reached the end of the viability of that land development model.
My entire life has been driven by protection of the environment. You know, it's not any one thing. It's really a little bit of everything, and that's why it's so important to have a wide array of expertise on the Grand Challenge team, really taking on LA sustainability. The other thing that I really love about this project, it's not just UCLA. It's only going to work as a Grand Challenge if we partner with the City of Los Angeles, if we partner with the business community, if we partner with Los Angeles County.
There's almost a sense of, I don't want to call it urgency, but there's maybe a sense of need to collaborate now, because these challenges that we're taking on are so complex and so big.
I am very optimistic that we can make Los Angeles a better place.
We could do things so much better and so much more beautifully for us.
If you don't believe that you can make the impossible possible, you know, you won't. Thanks, Vic. So this was, the Grand Challenge was launched in 2013. We started working on it, Mark Gold and some of the folks that you saw in that video, really wonderful colleagues. Back in 2011, we were ready to launch the Grand Challenge and make a public announcement. And at the time, the Vice Chancellor for Research called a number of us up, it was over a weekend, and asked, you know, are we gonna get criticized for saying that LA should target, you know, completely localizing its water resources and getting to 100% renewable energy, including decarbonizing transportation, and protecting ecosystem biodiversity, enhancing it, in fact, was one of the original goals. And he asked me if somebody from, Caltech or MIT got, contacted by someone from the LA Times, would they say that we're crazy and it can't be done? And I said, well, we're not crazy, and the only reason, there's no laws of physics getting in the way of us being able to achieve this, right? This is going to be about garnering the political will, the financial resources, overcoming some of the traditional institutional barriers, and then changing people's beliefs and behaviors. And I said, besides that, if somebody from Caltech or MIT wants to debate me, bring it on. And he laughed and he said, okay, we're going forward with this. So since then, I love to tell that story, and people who know me well and who work with me in the Grand Challenge, they're sick of hearing me tell the story. But I tell the story over and over and over because I think it really captures the ethos only 7 or 8 years ago, that people thought the notion of getting to 100% renewable energy might actually not be possible, like in violation of the laws of physics, right? And smart people, really smart, accomplished people were challenging the notion. We were really, really way out ahead of everyone else in defining, there should be goals and there should be targets. They should be time bound. They should be measurable, right? They should be achievable as well. But they need to be ambitious and specific. And so that was sort of the origin of the Grand Challenge, is to say to the world, look, we ought to have these ambitious goals. And the other thing that I've been known to say before is, look, getting to 100% is great. It's now it's obviously critically important, but back then, my thought was, look, if we only get to 60, 70, or 80%, it's better than where we are now, right? So you got to set a goal and you got to work towards it, and that's the bottom line. So when I think about how do we build in the context of this discussion, I think about how did we build the Grand Challenge. We have 250 plus faculty and over 40 departments from all around campus. This isn't just an engineering initiative or, engineering and public health and maybe some folks from, public policy. We have involved folks in the English department, in the law school, in social sciences, in the humanities, artists, architects, and in fact, even folks from the medical school, public health, science, all the sciences and engineering. So it's really a campus-wide initiative. It's one of the most incredible things I've been involved with in my career. We did partner with the city. We had a very strong influence on the city's development of their sustainability plan. The mayor launched in 2019 called the LA Green New Deal. And in fact, some of our faculty and staff helped co-author the county plan. So we partnered with the county as well over the course of time. So all these things that you heard Mark Gold, who was the founding director of the Sustainable LA Grand Challenge, he said, we need to partner with the city. We need to partner with the business community. We need to partner with the county. We've done those things. And we continue to support them through a number of research agreements where they fund us and other universities in LA to help answer questions that they don't have answers to, fill data gaps, understand things like how do we transition folks that have been working at fossil fuel, natural gas powered power plants. There's people who work there, who have children, who have homes, who have mortgages. If we're going to shut down those power plants to get to 100% renewables, how do we help them transition into a career path that makes sense and is just? So the gamut of what we work on, the range of things that we get to be involved with and that I get to experience through this position is just a wonderful opportunity. So I'll end there and turn it back to Vic and just thank you all for your attendance today.
Eric, thank you. What a gargantuan, epic project. And, what a way also to look at the power of the university to bring groups of experts together like that. I just have one quick question before we move on, and that is, you talked about changing people's behaviors and beliefs as part of this multi-layered matrix of change. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are today, you're a decade into this project, about changing us.
Yeah, and I want to also mention that there are, we have a campus-wide sustainability program that focuses on UCLA's operations. We also have over 50 student groups. These are groups that were ideated, conceptualized and created by our own undergraduate students and some graduate students in many cases, that are focused in various ways on different aspects of sustainability. So the Grand Challenge is this big campus-wide initiative with tremendous ambition, but there are so many other things happening at UCLA as well. How do we change people's minds? That's probably a bigger question than someone who's simply trained in engineering can answer, but I think it, in a number of ways, it has to do with education. It has to do with communication, not just education in a formal sense of students in the classroom, but education in a broader sense of engaging with the public, speaking honestly and factually about where we are with respect to climate change and environmental issues in general. I think it's critically important to influence the culture. How we influence culture is through art and music and design and all forms of artistic expression. And we've supported research in the arts through the Grand Challenge and with really amazing outcomes. And I think it, for us here in LA, I tell this to anybody who's interested in starting a company and running a startup, focus matters. Right? So we picked 3 targets: energy, water, and ecosystems at the very beginning. That's already too many, right? But we focused on Los Angeles. We didn't try to take on global sustainability. And in partnering with the city, in truly making the city and the mayor's office our partner, we created the Los Angeles Sustainability Leadership Council. And this is a group of business leaders, philanthropists, government elected officials, agency heads, the heads of DWP and LA Metro and the like, and sitting around a table and saying, what's getting in our way, right? And when you can get people in a room thinking about a single problem and getting them to say, well, here's what's stopping us from getting to where we want to get to. And someone else saying, well, we had that problem a few years ago. Here's what we did about it, right? So now you start to get some synergies and sharing practices. And so there's so many different levels in which we need to change people's minds in order to be able to build something like what we're building here in LA with all of these sustainability initiatives and plans and goals.
Well, I hope we'll get to talk more about it, but I am so thankful that the Grand Challenge, or the Grand Possibility, is right there before us and that you're leading it. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
I'd like to next introduce Jeffrey Inaba, who is an adjunct associate professor of architecture and urban design at UCLA and is the co-founder of Inaba Williams Architects. With Professor Hitoshi Abe, he runs the collaborative research studios Fire City and Fire LA Land, or Fireland. He's interested in ideas about urbanism, typology, and building technologies, and he believes research leads to improbable solutions that allow people to experience buildings and environments in unexpected ways. His firm is based in Los Angeles and Brooklyn, New York. Jeffrey is the author of Adaptation Architecture, Technology, and the City, and another book, World of Giving. For 10 years, he served as the features editor of Volume magazine, and he's edited numerous publications about design, cities, and technology. Welcome, Jeffrey.
Thank you, Vic. It's a pleasure to be here with other panelists. I'm gonna talk about building, as in creating a building. And that involves first deciding what to build and then building a strategy to realize it. So what I mean by strategy is creatively aligning available resources towards a desired end. So instead of hoping $1 billion will suddenly appear to fund a project, building a strategy involves creatively identifying available funds from various sources to make the project into a reality. In the case of the project that I'll share with you, the what to build decision was to create places that encourage health and a sense of community. The city of LA asked us to think about the future of gas stations as 2035 approaches. That's the year gas-powered vehicles will no longer be sold in the state. Our thought was not to build something new, but to preserve. Our idea was to reuse stations as places to stay rather than pump up and go. And this, for everyone's benefit, could be a way to understand the history of environmental inequality related to transportation. Constructing the strategy, or creatively aligning available resources, involved working with already approved plans for bike and pedestrian paths, with the goal of making the stations destinations in a network for recreational biking and walking. As 2035 approaches, the poorest Angelenos will have the toughest time replacing their gas cars. Many may want to defer that expense as long as possible. Keeping gas stations through 2035 in some neighborhoods will help sustain communities by maintaining a way to get to jobs and schools. In other words, they can be an infrastructure for residents as well as an infrastructure for cars. What we found was that in LA's poorest neighborhoods, people experience the most serious health challenges. Areas with the highest levels of poverty have the highest levels of asthma, cardiovascular disease, and low birth weight. In neighborhoods with the most severe economic and health burdens, we propose to keep and reimagine the gas station. There are roughly 165 stations in the city's most distressed neighborhoods. Those stations can support the well-being of residents by being places to hang out in one's own community. We propose a kit of parts to complement the iconic gas station canopy that can be used for a cafe, a bike shop, a food market, bakery, which we found that the revenue from which can more than compensate for the waning demand for gas. Finally, as a larger mobility plan for LA, the pass would connect to parks and metro lines leading to other urban outdoor spaces throughout the Southland. So what will follow now is a video of the proposal.
Oh, wait a minute. Oh, listen to this song. I love this song. You're admired. Don't give it up.
There might be a little bit frustration, that is for sure. Whatever you do, keep your hands off the wheel at all times.
Could you back up? I need to get some unleaded.
What do you do for a living?
With my mind on my money and my money on my mind.
What the hell?
Move!
Bitch, get out of the way.
Back out of there. Kim's a girl, can do everything.
Ed, you know, what should people see?
Maybe gas stations, maybe. The fact that they can just put them together in about 3 days, you know, or less.
And
sometimes it takes longer to tear down an old building than it does to put up the new one.
Right.
Jeffrey. What a compelling video, and I assume you're using this now to continue to develop your project. I'm just curious, before we go on, briefly, could you tell us where you are with this project?
Yeah, so this was a 1-month study that the city asked us to do. And so we're seeking additional funding to develop the project. And we're seeking partners to work on this with us to see where it will go. The city has already committed to creating a publication about the work that our office did along with 5 others. And we hope that it will be something that won't remain a proposal, but would be something that could actually get realized. And that's why I want to talk about the idea that as architects, that we build a strategy in order to build, meaning that we look for ways in which a project can be realized. And in this case, we see there being an immediate benefit to communities that might be possible through things like land trusts. It would be a benefit to gas station franchisees and owners insofar as already the revenue, the greatest source of revenue is retail, not the selling of gas. And then furthermore, in working with the city, that it might be possible to incentivize housing and other forms of development around preserved gas stations through FAR allowances, which would allow for greater density in those areas. And that because there would be a network of bike and pedestrian paths, that there might also be ways to reduce the requirement for vehicles for developments that would be close to this area.
Well, there's someone I'd like to introduce you to. His name is Dr. Eric Hoek. He's actually on the program, and I think you guys have some things to chat about, maybe off screen, but yeah.
Yeah, and hopefully part of the conversation. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jeffrey.
You're most welcome. Yeah, thanks.
Finally, I am pleased to introduce Adam Bradley to you. Dr. Adam Bradley is a professor of English and founding director of the Laboratory for Race and Popular Culture, the RAP Lab at UCLA. He's a writer at large for the New York Times T magazine, where he contributes essays and profiles on the arts and culture. Bradley is the author or editor of 6 books, including Book of Rhymes, The Poetics of Hip Hop, the Anthology of Rap, and the New York Times bestseller, One Day It'll All Make Sense, a memoir he wrote for the rapper and actor Common. He has also written extensively on the literature and legacy of the novelist Ralph Ellison. Bradley's latest book, The Poetry of Pop, unlocks the mysteries of word, image, and sound in popular music across genres, featuring the music of Bruce Springsteen, Beyonce, and beyond. Welcome, Adam.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vic. And thank you as well to Anne-Marie and the rest of the team. I'm new to UCLA. I've only been here just over a year. And what a wonderful way just to join this community. Special thanks as well to the students and community members who are joining us tonight. I mean, this is why we do what we do. Those of us who are professors is to be in conversation with you and to learn from you and to share with you and indeed to build with you. So I'm really looking forward to doing that this evening. To invoke a musical analogy, I'd like to present one more variation on our theme tonight. And to do that, I want to share my screen and bring you into a part of my life as the director of the Rap Lab and the work that I do and the scholarship I do or the writing I do for the public. Engaged really with a manifestation of this term. Now, I wouldn't be much of an English professor if I didn't offer a little by the way of etymology. When you look up build in the OED, that Oxford English Dictionary, the last word on language in English, you will find that the term comes to us from the Proto-Germanic, the origins of the word meaning house or dwelling. Now, Jeffrey just talked about building as in creating a building. Well, thank goodness we have Ralph Waldo Emerson to explain that all language is also fossil poetry, and that a word like build can have implications and manifestations in the symbolic register as well. And that's certainly how I plan to consider it. So with that in mind, I'd like to address our question tonight. How do we build in the context of the broader question that we're asking for this entire quarter, if not now, when? That needful call to action, a call to urgency, and indeed to collectivity. It's an invocation to work together to achieve a more equitable, just, and sustainable society. These messages resonate deeply with me. They're the reason that I founded the Laboratory for Race and Popular Culture, the Rap Lab, about 10 years ago, first at the University of Colorado at Boulder, and now at UCLA. It's a call to bring together folks across disciplines to direct our research, teaching, and outreach toward these big questions in a way that can be kind of like a Trojan horse. You know, culture, a song, your favorite TV series. These things can get us to talk as a community about really weighty issues, but to do it lightly at first, to do it without a high cost of entry into the conversation, to give us a lingua franca to engage in really profound and often vexed concepts. And for the Rap Lab, a lot of what my students, undergraduates and graduate students and others involved have been doing has revolved around hip hop. Now, hip hop has a particular understanding of this term that we're talking about tonight, the term build. You see, in hip hop, to build is to exchange in conversation across difference often. It's about the idea perhaps of the Cypher, that competitive and collaborative space where folks push each other to heights of excellence in artistry. It understands community in a certain way as not necessarily being about always seeing eye to eye, but in fact about a kind of antagonistic cooperation at times as well. To build then is to create together or alone, but in the context of others at all times. Hip hop's almost 50 years old. It's a trip to think about this because it is an art form that always seems so young, so new. But in August of 1973, right before the school year was to begin, a young kid who went by the name of DJ Kool Herc and his sister Cindy decided that they wanted to throw a party in order to get a little extra money for school clothes. This is what some call the birth of hip hop at 1520 Sedgwick Avenue. And it began with simple things: 2 turntables, a microphone, a sound system, maybe even less than that, a kind of a fist to tap on a table, maybe a mind to rhyme, nothing more than that. Hip hop emerged out of what KRS-One, one of the innovators of hip hop in that second generation, called the reality of lack, the final conclusion of a generation of creative people oppressed with the reality of lack. And what these young, mostly Black and brown people created became a global culture. They built that out of almost nothing at all. And so in that spirit, I offer 3 lessons that hip hop can teach us as we come to understand what building is for our moment, for this present moment. And I want to take you through each to think about the foundations of the kind of community that can build together, to think as well about the space that I talked about earlier of the Cypher, that competitive collaborative circle coming from the Arabic word for circle, zero, that is, that circled space in which we create. And finally, the idea of the remix, which is so evocative and was something that came to my mind when I was hearing Jeffrey speak about, remixing the spaces of these gas stations to be something that at once reflects what they were and what they can become. So these are the elements that I'd like to spend a few minutes together thinking about, and I hope to be able to talk more in the Q&A period as well to build on these lessons. So the foundation. A few short months before the pandemic, I had the pleasure of traveling to Irvine to keynote the first ever Afro-Korean hip hop festival. This was an unlikely academic conference, and my colleagues will understand how unusual this is when I explain it. I think that some of you students will as well, because my lecture, my keynote, was at about 8:30 a.m. And I thought that was bizarre at first. Like, don't you want to build up to the brilliance that I'm about to drop? No. I soon learned why, because you see, at 8:30 p.m., a slightly more conventional time, I was knee-deep with a few thousand of my new closest friends listening to an amazing concert. The beats were loud, heads were bobbing mostly to the same rhythm, and we saw something truly amazing, which is this art form born in the South Bronx, this art form born among Black youth and brown youth, now manifested globally in this powerful, powerful way with authentic connections to a common set of cultural touchstones. Curtis Blow was there, the first solo rap artist signed to a major label, performing with his son. His grandchildren were on stage. It was a communal affair. Tiger JK, a SoCal kid and an early innovator of Korean hip hop, was also there with his new group of Korean artists, performing in a way that was at once familiar to the sounds of the old school Curtis Blow, yet somehow different. It was such a moving moment to me to see them on stage. And when I was blessed enough to go backstage, I got to see them have a remarkable exchange. Curtis Blow had never heard of Tiger JK or some of the rest of the artists, but he gained such respect for them when he saw them performing. And I remember Tiger JK going up and basically genuflecting to Curtis Blow. The deference that he showed, it's a deference that comes with working in a cultural space, not inherently your own, but one that you earn a place in by virtue of your commitment to the culture, your mastery of the skills. And I saw a similar genuflection from Curtis Blow back to Tiger JK for having seen his performance, his just immaculate skill with rhyming to a beat, the way that he knew the tradition and carried it forward in his own way to make something new out of old things. And it put me in mind of something that our wonderful colleague here at UCLA, Robin D.G. Kelly, wrote a few years back. He wrote that without new visions, we don't know what to build, only what to knock down. We not only end up confused, rudderless, and cynical, but we forget that making a revolution is not a series of clever maneuvers and tactics, but a process that can and must transform us. I think about hip hop when I read those words from Robin, and I think about this, of what hip hop might bring to us into this conversation this evening, that we can come together across vast differences when we exercise deference when required, when we recognize each other's inherent dignity, something that must not be something that has to be earned, but is rather inherent in us all, and when we embrace new beats and new rhymes beside the old. The Cypher. Now, if any of you out there are like me, perhaps you've dabbled at certain points in your life in different elements of hip hop. I soon learned that I was not going to be a rapper. I was not going to be a DJ. I wasn't much of a dancer. And when I tried graffiti, I got in big trouble with my grandparents. So none of that was going to work. What I had to do was find my own point of entry into the culture, my own place within the circle. Well, what you see here is a picture of an event that happens regularly in Atlanta called the Soul Food Cypher. Artists, poets, lyricists come together to exchange words, to push each other toward heights of lyric excellence, to challenge each other, to compete, and also to build in a positive sense, to support one another in the art. My thing's going crazy. My apologies. We're doing this live. There we go. And it put me in mind of something that I had the pleasure of taking part in myself, again, just months before the pandemic, while I was still in Colorado. On a cool Colorado evening, we had a party on the rooftop of a local museum, a museum of Boulder, one that perhaps had never seen so many people of so many different races and styles in one place at one time. What we did is we took it over with music, with movement. The great dancer, hip hop legend, Rennie Harris was there and started it off. And the thing that happened so remarkable was to see the circle expand and to see who entered the circle, to see the styles that they brought, to see the range of ages and races and all the kinds of moves that people brought in to this space. This was one of the most moving moments I'd ever had in a life dedicated to hip hop. And it put me in mind of this, that when we achieve a circle of trust, this competition and collaboration can activate new ways of building together, new ways of finding a new groove. One more concept, the remix. Well, this story begins with a couple albums and it crosses decades. It begins with really a trick of language more than anything else. In 1968, the Beatles worked on their classic double album, the White Album, really one of the landmarks of the era and the beginning of the end for the group. Around the same time as that, we start seeing really the bubbling up of hip hop. Now, fast forward several decades to the early part of the 21st century, and a young DJ in Los Angeles by the name of Danger Mouse is listening to an album by Jay-Z that's just come out called The Black Album, inspired actually by Prince's album by that name rather than an inverse of the White Album. But nonetheless, he says the following. I'll let his words do the speaking. One day I was cleaning my room and listening to the Beatles' White Album. So I'm listening to the White Album and I'm putting the Black Album away, and I suddenly have this idea. I decided to see if I could take those two albums and make one song, just because of the names of the two albums and because they're perceived as being so different, and because I've always loved Ringo's drum sound. Now, the much maligned Ringo gets a shout out here, which I think is wonderful. But here you have this DJ who'd been working and producing hip hop songs in the more conventional way, taking the White Album and using it as a source material, using it as an archive, basically taking it to the top of a 20-story building and dropping it to the ground and seeing the shellac crack, metaphorically again, and I work in metaphor, and taking little pieces of a drum solo, taking little fragments of Paul's bass line, taking little fragments of John's vocals, and remixing them in a way that could be a new bed for sound from Jay-Z's a cappella. And it's an amazing, amazing album to listen to, and I highly recommend that you do if you get the chance. At the heart here is something that hip hop can teach us about building, that building can be born of configuration, of the mashup, the remix, of configurable culture. We can draw from it this bit of knowledge that building can be rebuilding, remixing, reimagining what others have built before you. This too is a lesson from hip hop. And so as we continue with our evening, I hope that we can have a little bit of that beat in our heads, to think about building from all of these angles, to think about how hip hop can help us find our way toward the future. Thank you.
Adam, thank you for this extraordinary presentation and your extraordinary use of Prezi. That was amazing. I've a little follow-up question for you. Competition and collaboration, building culture, remixing, bringing our experience and our histories together to take us into the future. And you're at a university. And I'm wondering, if you could just take a moment to share with us the university is so hierarchical. It's all about, I mean, obviously we study our history, but it's also a focus on new knowledge in ways that maybe create some tension with what you're describing. And you could say a little bit about how you manage those tensions between your passion, what you study, and the university itself.
Gosh, I love that. And many of us within the academy, of course, are its greatest critics as well, even as we love it. And that shares something with hip hop too. You know, hip hop, for all the ways that it is the beautiful things that I just described, it also carries all these other things that, you know, people know about, the sexism, the misogyny, the elements of violence and other things that are also part of the culture. Hip hop contains its own critique. And so I think with the academy too, we contain our own critique of our excesses. And one of the critiques in my small way that I've tried to do is in building the space of the Rap Lab. And just to give you a quick example of how I've tried to mess with, at least remix the hierarchical nature of things. At any given time, certainly under non-COVID times, you will find me in a room, perhaps with a advanced graduate student getting her doctorate, and with, you know, an 18-year-old first-year student with they are just fresh out of high school, and alongside a host of folks from computer science, from the natural sciences, from the humanities and the arts, all in a room engaged in conversation about some of the matters we've been talking about this evening. And it's a wonderful, wonderful thing for someone who loves knowledge as I do to be humbled every time I'm talking about hip hop by the knowledge that folks bring who are far younger than I. Because, you know, the music that's being made now is not for me. It's for them. It's for even my daughters who are 8 and 10. It's for the 16, 18, 22-year-olds out there. And so my job is to find my point of entry, to listen with their ears and to engage in that way. So I think because I study hip hop, I'm constantly challenging the way I understand myself within the academy, recognizing that it is a hierarchical space, but one where we can find these little subversive moments to undo it or to remix the hierarchy and to create opportunities for true collaboration.
Thank you so much, Adam. Let's move forward and then go back and move forward again, just like we do. Before we shift to a conversation amongst our guests, I bring you Kevin Kane, Director of UCLA's Visual and Performing Arts Education Program, who will introduce our special presentation for tonight. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you, Vic, and hello, everyone. So once again, it's my pleasure to be with you all tonight and present VAPA's final offering to this year's 10 questions. As indicated by and apropos of this year's program, we're ending with a sense of urgency and opportunity. Tonight's question, how do we build, probes the ways we build, and in some cases, as we've been hearing, rebuild or preserve. Critical questions that force us to think about the world we want to live in and the promises we have made to create safe and healthy communities for our children. So tonight's community arts project reminds us that this next generation of citizen artists have already been grappling with this question, taking on the task, and above else, they're a tremendous source of hope and optimism. So I'm looking towards our youngest participants this evening, the students at the Social and Gender Equity Magnet, otherwise known as SAGE, at Millikan Middle School, under the guidance of VAPA teaching artists Raimundo, Carrie, and Julie. They looked at the challenge straightforwardly and with deep consideration, inspiring creativity, collaboration, and some critical thinking. Tonight's project is multifaceted, a multidisciplinary art project. It asked 7th and 8th graders to tackle such important questions as How do we build a truly safe and equitable world? Inclusive spaces for all, green communities that sustain as well as contain, a society that is non-binary, and a future that is non-restrictive. The project utilizes a range of art techniques. It took about 4 weeks to complete from beginning to end. I'd say it's a mix of urban planning, architectural studies, and digital arts, informed by queer theory and theories of creative play. For the students at Sage, they're already engaging in deep and meaningful dialogues and praxis regarding social and gender equity. Obviously, it's in their name of their magnet. So this project was an opportunity for them to materialize a world they've already been thinking about for quite a while, a world where they and all of us can be free to be ourselves, a world they're already building every day. So Sage artists, some of whom might be in the room tonight, we were blown away by your intelligence, your kindness and creativity, your sense of joy and play, and most importantly, your vision for the future. Special thanks to Mr. Joey Porter, the magnet coordinator at Sage, for your belief in this project and for your endless amount of patience, humor, and passion. Once again, gratitude to our VAPA teaching artist and to Brian P., our VAPA program assistant, for helping to edit all this footage and bring it into such a beautiful video. On a personal note, since this is my last evening spending time with you, thank you to Professor and friend Vic Marks, UCLA Art Strategic Communications Executive Director Anne-Marie Burke, the rest of the 10 Questions team for being such supportive partners for VAPA. As we endeavor to contribute to the conversations you've been having this quarter, it's been a pleasure and an honor to be a part of this special community, a pleasure to facilitate the inclusion of these communities that we're working with through our VAPA Arts Education and Community Arts programs. So without further ado, let's play the video from Sage Magnet.
Skate park, it could be a pool, it could be anything else, like the examples that Julie gave us. So you want to have it be things be roughly the size that you're going to make when we actually start building like physical 3D versions of this space.
It makes you feel like where you want to be, and like I have books and crystals, very like spiritual and like, you know, like that type of energy. The cafe is like kind of like a fairy type of groove, and like their seats are like little mushrooms, and then the floor is just very like, it was very DIY.
I'm making a pride flag stock, and this is kind of like the printer that you can use to print out the pride flags. And these are all of them. These are just some examples of here that I use by using paper and hot gluing them together. So this is the pride flag. Yeah, and then this is the lesbian flag, the transgender flag, the bisexual flag, and the pansexual flag.
Be careful, it's kind of everywhere.
You're done?
Yeah.
Let's bring it in. Tell me.
No, it's a platypus worshipping center. We have no idea why she came up with that.
Can you repeat that again?
A platypus worshipping center.
Fantastic. Let's bring it outside. Find a space in our city that we just built here. These are the streets. So find a space where you want to put it.
So we made like a LGBTQ center,
On the front is like the entrance, and it just says "Love is Love." And like on the sides, we added grass.
I know. Just a place where people can feel accepted and not feel like they have to hide who they are.
My name is Joseph Porter, and I am the magnet coordinator for SAGE, which is the Social and Gender Equity Magnet at Millikan Middle School. As one of the original architects of this program, we are trying to create a community where children aren't burdened by problems of gender identity, sexuality, race, religion, all of it. So there's nothing for them to fight against, and then they have all of that leftover energy to focus on not just their learning, but on their character building, on the content of who they actually are, about service to others, about making their world and the world of others a better place. So it's about creating a future where children aren't burdened, where they can just be free to be who they truly are and to then be the best version of that being.
Wow. Big shout out, Sage, if you're here, let us know through the chat. That's incredible, the work that you're doing. And, going back to, introducing Jeffrey Inaba to more folks, I think you all should meet. And on a very serious note, when Eric Hoek talks about changing behaviors and beliefs, the work that you're doing at SAGE is precisely what I imagine will be part of fulfilling the grand challenge, is to build our places, our cities, our lives better. Let's bring back all of our guests here. I think you're all coming. Yes, you are. That was pretty spectacular, wasn't it?
It was great.
So it feels like everything is just fitting together so nicely this evening. I have a question to start us off, and then we can just see wherever it takes us. So firstly, thank you for sharing an introduction to the important projects you're involved in and the ways in which you think about building. So each of you are working very differently, of course, and the subject of collaboration has come up a few times. And I wonder if you could each talk a little bit about what collaboration actually is or means and how it occurs in your work.
I thought Adam's commentary on the circle of trust and the Cypher and how when you have that trust among a group of people who may come from very different perspectives, it allows some unique outcomes. And we held last year what we called, it was a competition where we funded a number of projects. One project up about $1 million through the Grand Challenge. We called it a sustainability sandpit. And part of the purpose of the sandpit was to find a great project and give it some initial funding. Part of it was kind of a remix in a way. And we had criteria, like you had to have folks from North Campus and South Campus. And for anyone who doesn't know, North Campus is, law, business, arts and architecture, School of Theater, drama and television, and like all the arts and humanities and social sciences. South Campus is engineering, medicine, physical sciences. And there is a literal divide in the middle of campus that we call Bruin Walk. But we wanted to get folks together. And we didn't just want to have, you know, some engineer or scientist saying, we just solved this problem and we're going to tack on an artist to, you know, make it seem like we're collaborating. There were projects that were led by folks in architecture or in the arts. And they had the creative idea, like Jeffrey's idea, reimagining what a gas station could be. I mean, it's amazing, right? It's an amazing concept. You take a step back and think about it, how it can build community, how it can facilitate the transition. And as I said before, in a just way. You can't force everybody to just get rid of their gas guzzling car and buy an electric vehicle. Not everybody's going to be able to do it in 2021, right? It's going to take time. And so, but putting together these groups of people, we ended up with these 8 projects that were absolutely amazing, and I don't think they could have really been created without that kind of synergistic collaboration and people being willing to listen and start to hear the language of how an artist or a social scientist speaks, you know, if you're a scientist or engineer, and vice versa. And we really speak different languages. We really frame problems very differently and see things from very different perspectives. But I think we often need the artists, social scientists, architects, to come up with a creative solution, and that then leads to, okay, how do we get there, right? And that's where somebody like me has a role to play. I'll stop there, but anyway.
And it can be messy. It can be messy work, right, Eric? It's not the most efficient process always. You know.
For sure. But I don't know. I was inspired by this activity that we did, the sand pit, and I'm inspired by both Jeffrey and Adam and the way that you guys frame problems and the way that you view these issues of how we build. It's pretty inspiring.
You know, I wrote a piece a couple months ago for T Magazine that focused on the idea of collectives, and it began thinking about arts collectives, Black arts collectives, specifically in the 1960s. That was where it started. So these groups of visual artists and architects and poets and others who came together, often with a radical political agenda as well, a subversive kind of pushing the boundaries of how we understand the limits of American freedom and liberty, and the fact of it's not being extended to everyone in equal measure. So art became a means to that kind of social engagement. I started with that, and then I started looking at the moment we're in now, particularly post George Floyd in the last couple of years, and the things that I know you grappled with in 10 questions last year, and that we continue to think about today. And it's miraculous to see the transformation in the shape of collectives and how folks are collaborating today. A couple takeaways to highlight. One is a move toward much more multiracial coalition building. So a lot of these collectives cross all sorts of boundaries of identity that somehow we think are siloed, but are in fact working together. The other thing is that when you talk to folks, often the work can be messy, can have moments of tension and friction that the group has to be able, if it's going to sustain itself, to direct towards something generative, where there can be moments of people getting upset, and sometimes being in collaboration means, you know, raising your voice a little bit, or walking out the room, or taking a few moments apart, clashing a little bit in order to get to the point of seeing your way through it. And I just found so much inspiration in both the 80-somethings who forged these collectives in the 60s and are still alive to the hope of this collaboration. And it's important to make the distinction between hope and optimism, because I think a lot of folks are not optimistic about our prospects in the moment, but retain a sense of hope. of what we might still achieve. And that has to rely on collaboration.
I think like for doing architecture projects and urban planning projects, a lot of times we'll start by doing research in many different areas of knowledge and try to synthesize knowledge by working with experts, which is always really exhilarating and amazing. The thing that about collaboration that we're discovering is that the more technical we deep dive into a topic, that we like discover somebody who's doing incredible research, who's accomplished, who's known in their field, and that they what they want in a collaboration is to be able to share that knowledge and discovery with a broader audience. And so I think they really value, so instead of us being simply people who do research and discover things, it's the ability and really the privileged position of trying to communicate a phenomenon of the way that cities work, or the way that a building could work, or a space could work, that others have found, and that we become the facilitators for that. So I think the being the messenger for great ideas is a form of collaboration that we feel really grateful to have grown into.
I'm just thinking that so many of, all of these projects and projects that matter require collaboration, and yet our students are very often instructed that it's what they do themselves, that is a measure of who they are. And it's it's an interesting conflict for them. Just, for you all to know, our students are doing collaborative projects each week, and we're working on what it means to collaborate. Sticking with the students, I'd like to ask you, in consideration of the many students that are here tonight, would you share something about your own process of becoming who you are today? What ideas or mentors helped you to build towards the work you're doing now, if you would?
My story at least begins with collaboration. I was a kid who was homeschooled until high school and was taught by my grandmother in remarkable kind of liberal arts education as a young kid. But that meant I was basically in first grade when I started high school socially. So I had a little catching up to do. I did get there, I think. But so the first collaboration began there with my grandmother. And it would be sitting together and reading a Shakespeare play, or going out and trying to write about the things that we saw in her wonderful garden. Fast forward to college, and I found another mentor that really put me on the path I'm on now, a man named John Callahan. And he was is an Irish-American guy, rough around the edges in all the best possible ways, a vernacular character who happened to be friends with one of the greatest novelists of the 20th century, Ralph Ellison, the author of Invisible Man. And I took a class from Dr. Callahan in which we read that novel among a number of others. And I can vividly recall reading that book and seeing within the pages of Invisible Man something like my own memoir of coming to grips with identity, with what it means to be an American, a Black American, what it means to be a citizen of the world. All of these things were in that book. And it just so happened that when I was in college, Mr. Ellison passed away, and Professor Callahan was named literary executor. He made me his research assistant. And that began as photocopying stuff. That began as carrying boxes up the stairs and putting things away. And it ended in us sharing the cover of a book, co-editing Ellison's unfinished second novel. And we still collaborate to this day on work related to Ralph Ellison. So there's a specific moment of a mentor who becomes a friend, who becomes a collaborator and appear in a really rich and wonderful way. And I've had the benefit of having these same kinds of relationships with my students that have grown over the years into collaborations, into other kinds of ways of making things in the world, of making collaborative projects and all sorts of things by virtue of that initial point of contact. So understanding that these connections with faculty that you cultivate can be something that can build towards something brilliant potentially.
Thank you, Adam.
I'm a child of the UC. I went to Berkeley, loved it. And I guess for me, the trials and tribulations of being an architect and the rewards of being an architect come from the sense of interdisciplinarity that was instilled in our education. And did undergraduate in architecture at Berkeley, went to the East Coast to do a graduate degree, got a great job afterwards, working on an amazing project for a Pritzker Prize, a Pritzker Award awarded architect. And I don't know, I just didn't feel like this was me. And it was really a crisis of faith in architecture. So I went back and did a PhD, or started a PhD in architectural history, thinking that maybe just knowing more about history would help me find a way. And it was there that I met a mentor who really developed a way of communicating architectural thinking to the way spaces are used, to the way governance is managed, to the way that publishing is done as an industry. I mean, really taking the tools of architects and using those synthetic, analytical, cultural skills to look at not just physical spaces, but to look at different categories of culture, and then to repackage that into an architectural language that other people can understand. And it was really that was, I think, the high point for me in understanding how I could contribute to a discipline by knowing things from other disciplines.
Thank you. Can you give us a short version of this? Because I want us to be able,
Sorry.
I want us to be able to do a couple more things before we.
Yeah, I'll keep it short. I mean, Mom gave me my moral center. Dad taught me how to write, how to work hard. My PhD advisor, obviously, is almost like a second father in a lot of ways. And then I'll say that there were some colleagues at UCLA on the one end that taught me how not to collaborate and how not to treat other people. And then some other colleagues who are, folks that I'm friends with, and our wives know each other, and we play golf together, and we've been collaborating for 15 plus years, who taught me the value and the importance of being generous to people that are younger than you. That to try to make it not about yourself, right? It's about the student, it's about their journey, and it's their opportunity that you're helping to facilitate. And then when you have younger colleagues, junior faculty, let them take the credit anytime you can, and encourage them to do so. And like I said, just be kind and be generous. And I think those are some of the more important lessons I've learned after becoming a professor.
And I'm sure, for myself, they just keep on coming, those lessons. There's so much to learn. I've been kind of monopolizing this discussion, and before I know we have a couple of really interesting questions from the folks here, but I also want to just invite you all, and in terms of building and what you've heard from one another, is there something you'd like to share with each other or ask each other? besides looking at your calendars and planning on connecting?
Well,
future
I
months?
mean, I just, the one thing that Adam brought up, that brought up the invitation to the Sedgwick event, that collaboration sometimes can be feedback. I mean, I think looking at the birth of hip hop and, you know, and knowing that that it didn't happen in like nightclubs or whatever as the birth of disco or and the East Village scene grew. It was recreation centers and housing projects, and the idea that there would be feedback, like, you know, a group of artists would show up for one person's performance, and that performance would influence another performance and would influence another performance in an urban setting in the Bronx, where there would be a kind of direct feedback through the artwork. It's something where you could see the relationship between the architectural context and the culture that it could provide. I think it's a great example of what we can build anywhere and everywhere. That it doesn't, collaboration doesn't have to be direct collaboration. It could be one of contributing to an art form through dialogue.
Yeah, and in that regard, it offers an alternative map to the city. I mean, I often look at the mass transit map of New York, and I think about those stops, and I think about what's missing, what the places that are hard to access, like Sedgwick Avenue. You would have had to have gotten on one train, transferred to another, hopped onto a bus, and then gotten off the bus and walked, you know, to get to that place. And just the ways that it remaps that those urban spaces by virtue of, you know, sometimes quite literally through graffiti and things like that, the marking of the space, and sometimes in the more metaphoric sense through the connections of people and sounds and the influence of culture. And you know, you said something, Jeffrey, that I wanted to catch up on a little bit, and that's, you said something along the lines that research leads to improbable solutions, and I wonder if you could reflect a bit more on that, because that resonates with my musical mind when I think about the improbable solution of learning how to scratch a record. It's something as simple as that, which is now a foundational element of a certain DJing aesthetic, and the accidents that lead to these moments of innovation. I wonder if you could just illuminate an instance of that improbable solution that might have emerged from some of the research you've done.
Yeah, I mean, I thought, thanks for bringing that up, Adam. I mean, I think it actually resonated a lot with what Eric was saying about converting problems into solutions. And I'm a firm believer that being able to crystallize the essential paradox of a problem is what can lead to a counterintuitive solution, a solution that hasn't been thought of. And I think, like, you know, it's, I don't know how to categorize it. I don't know if it would be scientific or non-scientific, but I think it's a way of thinking that both artists and scientists share. That it's the framing of a problem in a counterintuitive way that could lead to an improbable solution. You know, like with the gas stations. Like, yeah, we can do a lot of things with gas stations. You know, maybe we can try something a little different than what might be the obvious solution.
Yeah, and that's like what you were saying, Eric, about making the impossible possible, and just the audacity of that kind of leap of faith that emerges out of ultimately a sense of collective hope in the endeavor, and you know, maybe in the face of evidence to the contrary, still hoping against that of the possibility of achieving something great. It's really inspiring.
Two of the most important questions to ask, and I try to do this with my students and in my research lab, is, you know, what if, and then whatever follows, right? And then when someone says, oh, that can't be done, it's never going to work, why not? Right? Keep asking why. Why? There's a management theory from, like, Toyota in Japan from the 80s, the 5 whys it's called. You keep asking why at least 5 times, being eventually get to a fundamental understanding. But what if and why not, right? Like, what if we could, you know, reimagine the utility of a gas station for a greater social good, right? And, why not, right? So that kind of thinking, whether it's, artistic, the example you gave, Adam, of, the white album and the black album, right? Like, what if we mashed them together, right? I mean, that's just where I think great unexpected ideas come from, whether it's art, science, architecture, what have you.
I think the most audacious thing is the idea of 100% sustainable. Like, I had no idea that was achievable. And, like the fact that that could be done at the scale of a city like Los Angeles that's so carbon intensive it requires a university to achieve that. I don't think it would be an industry achievable solution or solely an industry conducted initiative. And I think that to me seems improbable. But once you say it, it's like, oh wow, okay, well let's see the roadmap. Let's do it.
Yeah, audacious. Thank you for being audacious. I want to just make a shift where, who wants to end this evening? Don't say you do, because I think it feels like we should go on, but this is an opportunity. We'll take a couple of questions from the folks here, and there's a really interesting question right now from Hayden Carroll, who is a student. What new fields of knowledge, the arts, economics, psychology, physics, etc., do you think you could each tap into to further what you're currently building? Great question, Hayden. Thank you.
Who wants to go first?
Yeah, Eric, I don't know if there are any things that you aren't working with already, but.
Oh no, there's plenty. I think, 20 years ago, it was nanotechnology, and that has evolved quite a bit. And I'd say now in the sciences and engineering, and when you think about infrastructure and you think about anything related to technology, from smart home devices, right, to traffic control and anything you can imagine, it's artificial intelligence and machine learning is really, it's not taking over, it's just taking root. And the mathematical principles and the computer science methodologies have been around for half a century, but it's evolved now, and it's not mature, I would say, but it's evolved now to where you're beginning to see applied artificial intelligence in very specific domains of knowledge or scientific principle, where you're starting to see a lot of traction, a lot of gain. And I think that's one of the real emerging fields of knowledge for anyone in science or engineering. I think it transcends disciplines, but I can just speak from my perspective.
I'll be brief and just say, for me, it's neuroscience, because that gets at the heart of so many of the intangible things that, as a literary scholar, as someone who writes about culture, that I try to attend to, matters of taste and feeling. With my students, when we work with poetry or when we work with song lyrics, whatever case may be, and this goes all the way down to the work I do with K-12 students, I start with having them attune themselves to their emotions, to employ a kind of emotional seismograph. And so to be able to map on more of a sense of the neuroscientific implications of what's going on when we make aesthetic judgments, when we feel something profoundly in some kind of art that we take in, that would be a great gift and something I would love to bring to bear on my future work.
Yeah, similar to Eric, I think computation is really fascinating in that as the world becomes more digital for all of us in every way, that the material world becomes more valuable as a place of experience. And the potential for computation to help materialize the physical world is something that is deeply exciting. And so similar to what Eric was saying about AI not taking over, but taking root, that it seems like a powerful tool, not a replacement for something. And in the case of architecture, a powerful tool to physicalize things.
Before we close this evening, I wonder if you have something brief you'd like to add, maybe particularly to the students who are here or for all of us on the subject of how we build.
Go ahead, Eric. I was just going to say that as something I do in my teaching as well, I defer to the wisdom of this community of folks in the generations that are coming up. And there's just so much potential, and you saw it in the clip from the middle school. My goodness, just the power and the wisdom of those young people is just remarkable and such an inspiration. And I have a almost middle schooler in my own household, and she and her younger sister both give me, and I know Eric too has children around the same age. They give you a lot of hope for where we might go, and they and our students here, you all here who have been with us through these difficult times of remote instruction and all the things that we've grappled with, have shown such resilience and such a capacity to deal with tough things. And you know what, as I look toward the future, there's a lot of tough things coming our way. I think what we have to do is allow ourselves as a community to do what the great Otis Redding sang about a long time ago, to try a little tenderness with ourselves and with each other, and support our community in coming to grips with some of these vexing challenges, and to find our way forward together. But I have a lot of faith in those who are coming up, and I hope y'all take us along for the ride.
I would just say that building in the architectural sense requires logic, like the logic of working with gravity, and that building anything, whether it's an idea, a building, an artwork, etc., requires logic. And the great thing is that logic could be something that isn't universal. It could be something that makes sense to the author, and to be able to build on that and to reinforce that logic within one's own self is the power of creating something that others will understand and appreciate.
Don't be guided by fear. Fear is what breaks the circle of trust, right? Fear of accepting something you don't understand or haven't seen or heard before. But don't be guided by fear. Don't be afraid to fail, and follow your instincts. I think, as Adam said, I was listening, I couldn't agree more. Young people today have such better understanding of how to interact with each other, and at the same time, because they've interacted with each other over electronic devices for the majority of their lives, they have different instincts than we do in terms of what it means to interact and how to interact. And so I don't know, maybe some of that screen time that we all work so hard to keep our children away from was a blessing as we went into COVID, and they all just thought it was a smooth transition, and we'll figure it out as we go along. But anyway, don't be guided by fear.
Thank you so much to each of you for such extraordinary projects and such heartfelt wisdom that you're bringing to us tonight. Thank you all for being here with us to consider how we build. And this concludes this evening's program. We hope you'll join us again next week. Our question is, how do we sustain, keep that building going? Next week, same time, new link. And to learn more about the entire series or to RSVP, visit arts.ucla.edu/10 questions. Thank you and good night.